I'm Luca, 38 male. I live in a city that never sleeps in an apartment that's just big enough for one person and the quiet hum of a server rack. By day, I'm a financial analyst, a job where every number tells a story and every decimal point matters. My life is a fortress of logic and order built to protect me from the chaos of my own family. For years, I believed that if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and never asked for anything, I would eventually earn the one thing my father's money could never buy: his approval. That all changed on his 70th birthday, when in front of 100 people, he showed me exactly what I was worth. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family operates on a simple, unspoken principle. There is the sun, and then there are the planets that orbit it. The sun in our universe was my sister Isabella. 2 years my junior, she was everything I wasn't: effervescent, artistic, and effortlessly charming. Where I saw life as a series of complex equations to be solved, Isabella saw it as a canvas to be painted with broad, beautiful strokes. Our father, Julian, a man who built his reputation on the unflinching precision of a surgeon's scalpel, adored her for it. She was his masterpiece, the beautiful, unpredictable creation that proved he was more than just a man of science and steel. I, on the other hand, was the ghost at the feast. I was the responsible son, the one who followed the rules, got the sensible degree, and built a stable career. In my father's eyes, this made me predictable, solid, and utterly uninteresting. I was the foundation of the house, essential but unseen, while Isabella was the art that hung on the walls, admired by all. This dynamic was cemented in our childhood. When Isabella decided she wanted to learn piano, a grand piano appeared in our living room within a week. When I showed an interest in astronomy, I was given a book with faded pictures of the planets. When she scraped her knee, it was a family crisis orchestrated by Dad himself. When I broke my arm falling out of a tree, he glanced at the X-ray with clinical detachment and told me to be more careful next time. The message was clear and consistent. Her wants were needs, and my needs were inconveniences. I learned early on to stop wanting things, or at least to stop showing it. I poured myself into my studies, finding comfort in the predictable logic of numbers. Numbers didn't play favorites. The solution to a problem was either right or wrong. There was no room for interpretation or preference. It was a safe, stable world far removed from the emotional whims of my family. As we grew older, the disparity only widened. My father funded Isabella's art history degree in Europe, her unpaid internships at chic galleries, and eventually the seed money for the small, trendy gallery she now curated. Her life was a string of experiences, unburdened by financial worry. I paid my own way through state university, working nights and weekends. I took out loans for my master's degree and celebrated paying them off with a quiet dinner for one. I never asked my father for a dime, partly out of pride, but mostly because I knew the answer would be a lecture on self-reliance, a lecture Isabella never had to hear. My Aunt Alina, my father's sister, was the only one who seemed to notice the imbalance. She was a librarian, a woman who valued substance over style, and she saw the quiet efforts I made. "He loves you, Luca," she would tell me over coffee. "He just doesn't know how to show it." In his mind, your independence is a testament to his parenting. I wanted to believe her, but the evidence of my own life made it difficult. The lead-up to Dad's 70th birthday party was a masterclass in this family dynamic. It wasn't just a party, it was an event. My father, having retired from a distinguished career as a cardiothoracic surgeon, wanted to celebrate his legacy. Isabella was, naturally, in charge of everything. She selected the venue, a lavish country club with sweeping lawns, designed the invitations, and curated a guest list of over 100 of my father's most esteemed colleagues, friends, and our extended family. My role in this grand production, I was assigned the task of managing the budget spreadsheet. I was to track every expense, from the imported flowers to the string quartet, ensuring everything aligned with the generous budget Dad had provided Isabella. I was the logistical arm, the unseen mechanic, making sure the beautiful machine ran smoothly. I did my job perfectly, of course. The budget was balanced to the penny. I sent my final report to Isabella and my father a week before the party. Isabella replied with a single word: THX. My father didn't reply at all. It was a familiar ache, a dull thud of disappointment. And that I had long since learned to ignore, or so I thought. The night of the party was a spectacle. The country club ballroom glittered under the weight of crystal chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and lilies. My father stood at the center of it all, a king holding court. He was charismatic, laughing with old friends and accepting their praise with a practiced humility that never quite reached his eyes. Isabella floated through the room at his side, a vision in a silk dress, her laughter echoing like wind chimes. She was the perfect hostess, the doting daughter, the living embodiment of our father's success. I dressed in my best suit felt like an imposter. I made the rounds, shaking hands and making small talk, feeling the familiar invisibility settle over me. To most of these people, I was just Julian's quiet son, a footnote in the grand story of his life. The evening wore on with speeches full of glowing anecdotes about my father's skill as a surgeon and his supposed generosity. I listened to stories of his steady hands saving lives, of his contributions to medical journals, of the legacy he had built. In each story, he was a hero, a pillar of the community. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if they were talking about a man I had never met. The man I knew was precise and critical, a man whose praise was so rare it was like a foreign currency. After the main course, Isabella tapped a glass for attention. It was time for the gift presentation. A hush fell over the room as she began a heartfelt speech about our wonderful father, her voice trembling with emotion. She spoke of his wisdom, his support of her dreams, and the lessons he had taught her. It was a beautiful speech, and even I could admit it was masterfully delivered. To the man who gave me everything, she concluded, her eyes shining, I wanted to give you something to celebrate your freedom, your next chapter. She gestured toward the grand entrance of the ballroom. Two members of the club staff swung the doors open, revealing a brand new gleaming silver luxury sedan parked just outside. A giant red bow was perched on its hood. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. My father's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, the kind I had rarely seen directed at me. He embraced Isabella, kissing her on the cheek and whispering something that made her beam. It was an extravagant, stunning gift. I clapped along with everyone else, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. I knew Isabella couldn't afford a car like that. The gallery she ran was more of a passion project than a profitable business. This was my father's money, recycled back to him in a public display of affection. He had essentially bought his own gift, and Isabella was the celebrated presenter. Still, it was a moment between them, and I tried to be happy for him. My father took the microphone. "Thank you, my darling," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. "You truly know how to spoil your old man." He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on me. "And of course, I have a little something for my children as well." My heart skipped a beat. For a wild, foolish second, I thought maybe Aunt Alina was right. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment he would finally acknowledge me. He waved me forward, and I walked toward the stage, my legs feeling strangely numb. The spotlight followed me, and for the first time that night, I felt every eye in the room on me. My father gave me a stiff, one-armed hug. "For Isabella," he announced, turning back to the audience, "as she embarks on a new venture with the gallery, I want to ensure she can do so without worry." A man in a suit came forward with a portfolio, which my father presented to her. "This is the deed to her gallery building, paid in full, and a trust to cover her operating expenses for the next 10 years. The room erupted in applause. Isabella burst into tears, hugging our father tightly. My father let the applause die down before turning to me. He was still smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And for Luca," he said, his voice taking on a different, almost performative tone. "My practical, steady son, he doesn't need all this frivolity. He's self-sufficient, but I wanted to give him something to remember what's truly important." He handed me a flat, rectangular gift, elegantly wrapped. It felt light, almost empty. I fumbled with the wrapping paper, my fingers trembling under the curious gazes of 100 people. Inside was a silver frame, and in the frame was a photograph. It was a picture of him and Isabella taken a few years ago on a trip to Italy they had taken together. They were laughing, standing in front of a beautiful, sun-drenched vineyard. I wasn't on that trip. I was at home, working. The silence in the room was deafening. I stared at the photo, at their two smiling faces, a perfect picture of a family I was apparently not a part of. A wave of heat washed over me, a stinging, suffocating shame. He hadn't just forgotten me, he had actively, publicly, and deliberately replaced me with a picture of the child he preferred. He handed my sister a future and handed me a memory that wasn't even mine. The message was as clear as the glass in the frame: "This is my family. You are just an observer." I don't remember much about the rest of the party. It's a blur of forced smiles, murmured congratulations to my sister, and the heavy weight of the framed photograph in my hand. I felt like I was moving through water, the sounds of laughter and music distorted and distant. I managed to find my Aunt Alina by the patio doors. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad understanding that was somehow worse than pity. She didn't say a word, just gently took the frame from my hands and placed it face down on an empty table. Then she put her hand on my arm, her touch a small, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my humiliation. "Let's get some air," she said softly. We stepped out into the cool night. The manicured lawns of the country club stretched out before us, dark and silent. The contrast between the serene landscape and the storm inside me was jarring. "I'm so sorry, Luca," she began, her voice low. "That was cruel, there's no other word for it. I just shook my head, unable to speak. What was there to say? My father had drawn a line in the sand, and I was on the wrong side of it. All my life, I had tried to earn my place, to prove my worth through hard work and quiet dignity. In one fell swoop, he had shown me that none of it mattered. I wasn't a son, I was a supporting character, a prop to highlight his generosity toward the real star of the show. Why? I finally managed to ask, the word barely a whisper. Why does he do this? Aunt Alina sighed, a long, weary sound. She had been a silent witness to our family's dynamics for decades. Your father, Julian, has always needed an audience, she said, choosing her words carefully. And he needs a reflection. Isabella is his mirror. She reflects the life he wishes he had, artistic, free, adored. You, my dear, are his ledger. You reflect the life he actually built, duty, responsibility, hard work. He resents the ledger even though he knows he needs it. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow because they rang so true. I wasn't a person to him, I was a concept, a reminder of the sacrifices and discipline he prided himself on but secretly disliked. Isabella was his escape from that. We stayed outside for a while longer, talking about anything and everything else until I felt composed enough to go back inside, collect my coat, and leave without causing a scene. I drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring past my window. When I walked into my apartment, the quiet felt different. It was no longer peaceful, it was empty. The framed photo sat on my passenger seat. I had forgotten it on the table outside, but someone, probably my father, in a final twist of the knife, had given it to the valet to put in my car. I left it there. I couldn't bear to look at it. The next few days were a fog of anger and hurt. I went to work, stared at spreadsheets, and ran financial models, but my mind was elsewhere. The numbers, usually a source of comfort, now seemed meaningless. I was analyzing the financial health of corporations, yet I couldn't make sense of the emotional bankruptcy of my own family. The humiliation of that night replayed in my mind on a loop. It wasn't just the disparity of the gifts, it was the public nature of it. It was the way he had held me up as an example of self-sufficiency, as if it were a consolation prize, a polite term for being unworthy of his help. He had used my independence, the very quality he claimed to admire, as a weapon against me. He had punished me for not needing him. The turning point came a week later. I received a generic "thank you for coming" email from Isabella with a link to a digital album of party photos. Morbid curiosity got the better of me and I clicked. There were hundreds of pictures of smiling faces, of my father beaming, of Isabella looking radiant, and then I found it, a candid shot of the gift presentation. It captured the exact moment my father handed me the frame. The camera had caught the whole scene perfectly. There was my father, a benevolent smile on his face. There was Isabella in the background, a flicker of something, pity, triumph, in her eyes, and there was me. My expression was one of stunned disbelief, my shoulders slumped, my entire posture radiating a defeat so profound it made my stomach clench. But it was the crowd that broke me. Their faces were a mixture of confusion, awkwardness, and pity. In that one photo, I saw myself as they saw me. The forgotten son, the object of a bizarre and public shaming. Something inside me snapped. The years of quiet acceptance, of swallowing my pride, of making excuses for my father's behavior, it all evaporated. Aided in an instant. The hurt curdled into a cold, hard resolve. I was done. I was done being the ghost, the ledger, the footnote. My father, the great surgeon, was a master of cutting people open to fix what was broken. But he was also a master of inflicting wounds that no one could see. He dealt in prestige and image. His entire life was a carefully constructed facade of success, generosity, and familial devotion. And I realized with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating that foundations built on lies eventually develop cracks. As a financial analyst, my job was to find those cracks, the inconsistencies in the data, the hidden liabilities, the numbers that didn't add up. For the first time, I decided to apply my professional skills to my personal life. I was going to analyze my father. I was going to find the cracks in his perfect foundation. And I was going to bring the whole thing down. The shame he had so generously gifted me, I was going to return it to him with interest. My father, Julian, had built his entire identity around two pillars: his prestigious career as a surgeon and his image as a savvy real estate investor. He had retired from medicine a few years back, but he was still actively managing his property portfolio, a collection of commercial and residential buildings he'd acquired over decades. He often boasted about his golden touch in real estate, claiming he had a natural instinct for finding undervalued properties and turning them into cash cows. This was the source of the family wealth, the engine that funded Isabella's gallery and my father's lavish lifestyle. It was also, I suspected, where the secrets were buried. Men like my father, who crave control and admiration, often have a discrepancy between their public image and their private dealings. Image is expensive, and sometimes the methods used to maintain it aren't entirely above board. My quest for revenge wasn't going to be emotional, it was going to be analytical. I wasn't going to scream or yell, I was going to audit him. I started where any good analyst would, with the public records. For weeks, I spent my evenings and weekends digging through city property records, tax assessments, and LLC registrations. It was tedious work, a maze of shell corporations and holding companies designed to obscure ownership. My father was smart. He had structured his empire to be as opaque as possible. But he wasn't smarter than a determined analyst with a personal vendetta. I began to map out his entire portfolio, linking each property to its parent LLC and tracing the ownership back to him. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. He owned more than I thought, nearly 24 properties, including several high-end medical office buildings, a few apartment complexes, and the building that housed Isabella's gallery. The first major crack appeared when I was examining the financials for a mid-sized apartment building he owned in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. The property taxes paid seemed unusually low for a building of its size and rental income potential. I dug deeper, pulling up the building's assessment history. For the past decade, the property had been classified as having a significant portion of its units under uninhabitable status due to supposed structural issues. This classification drastically lowered its assessed value and therefore its tax burden. Yet when I cross-referenced this with rental listings for the area, I found numerous recent ads for apartments in that very building, complete with photos of newly renovated kitchens and bathrooms. There were no mentions of structural problems. He was lying to the city about the state of his building to avoid paying his fair share of taxes. It was a classic case of tax fraud, clever, hard to prove without an inside look but definitely illegal. I carefully downloaded every piece of evidence, the falsified assessment reports, the rental listings, tenant reviews praising the newly updated units. This was good, but it wasn't enough. It was a financial crime, but it lacked the personal sting I was looking for. My next step was to talk to Annalena. I needed more than just data, I needed context. I met her at her quiet, book-filled apartment, laying out my findings on her coffee table. She listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with each document I showed her. When I was done, she was silent for a long time. "I'm not surprised," she finally said, her voice heavy. "Julian has always believed the rules don't apply to him. He sees taxes as a penalty for success, not a civic duty." She then told me something that shifted the entire focus of my investigation. She told me about my father's old partner, a man named Marcus Thorne. They had started their real estate ventures together back in the 90s. They were best friends, Alina said. They built everything together. And then one day Marcus was just gone. Julian said they had a falling out. Over business strategy that Marcus sold his shares and moved away. It never sat right with me, it was too sudden. The name Marcus Thorne was the key. I spent the next week searching for him, hitting one dead end after another. It was as if he had vanished. Finally, through a deep dive into old legal archives, I found a record of a lawsuit from 20 years ago, Thorne v. Julian, my last name. The case had been settled out of court and the record sealed. A sealed record meant something significant was being hidden. This was the personal element I was looking for. Getting those records unsealed would be nearly impossible through legal channels, but in the world of finance there are other ways to get information. I used a professional contact to hire a private investigator, a discreet and highly effective man who specialized in corporate and financial disputes. I gave him all the information I had on my father and Marcus Thorne and a simple objective: find out what happened and get me a copy of that sealed settlement. It was expensive, but I didn't care. I sold off a portion of my own investment portfolio to fund the search, considering it the best investment I would ever make. While the investigator worked his magic, I turned my attention to the gift that started it all, Isabella's gallery. My father had proudly announced he had paid for the building in full. I pulled the property records for that address. As expected, the ownership had recently been transferred from one of my father's LLCs to a new one in Isabella's name. But then I saw something odd. The transfer was recorded as a sale, not a gift, for the price of $10. This is a common practice to legally transfer property. However, I also noticed a new mortgage had been taken out against the property on the same day by Isabella's LLC. The lender was a private credit firm, not a traditional bank. Why would she need a mortgage on a building that was supposedly paid in full? I followed the money. Using my knowledge of financial systems, I traced the origin of the loan. The private credit firm that had issued the mortgage to Isabella was in fact owned by another holding company. And after peeling back 3 more layers of corporate shells, I found the ultimate owner, my father, Julian. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. He hadn't given her the building at all. He had forced her to take out a massive loan from himself, structured through a series of shell companies to look legitimate. He wasn't her benefactor, he was her creditor. The trust he'd set up to cover her operating expenses was likely just enough to cover the monthly mortgage payments back to him. It was a sham, a tax-efficient illusion of generosity. He had trapped her. She wasn't free, she was indebted to him in a way she probably didn't even fully understand. He owned her business, and her future. This was his version of love, control dressed up as a gift. The public display at his party wasn't just about humiliating me, it was about branding her as his, forever tethered to him by a debt he had manufactured. The rage I felt was cold and pure. He hadn't just slighted me. He had manipulated and trapped my sister, the one person he claimed to adore. The game had changed. This was no longer just about my wounded pride, it was about liberation. The private investigator delivered the payload 2 weeks later. It came in a discreet manila envelope dropped off at my office by a courier. Inside was a thick stack of documents, a copy of the sealed settlement between Marcus Thorne and my father, along with a detailed report of the PI's findings. I waited until I got home, poured myself a stiff drink, and began to read. The story that unfolded in the legal jargon and witness depositions was uglier than I could have imagined. Marcus Thorne and my father hadn't just had a falling out. My father had systematically embezzled money from their joint partnership for years, diverting funds into his own private accounts to finance his first few solo property acquisitions. He was essentially stealing from their shared company to build his own separate empire. When Marcus finally discovered the betrayal, he was devastated. He confronted Julian, who, instead of showing remorse, threatened to ruin him. My father used his significant social capital and a team of aggressive lawyers to paint Marcus as incompetent and disgruntled. He created a narrative that Marcus's mismanagement was the reason for the financial discrepancies. The settlement was the final nail in the coffin. Marcus, financially ruined and emotionally broken, was forced to sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a paltry sum, just enough to disappear and start over. In essence, my father had paid him to take the fall and stay silent forever. The PI's report included Marcus's current location. He was living a quiet, modest life in a small town several states away, running a small hardware store. He had never recovered financially or professionally. My father hadn't just ended a partnership, he had destroyed a man's life and buried the evidence. Now I had all the pieces. The tax fraud, the predatory loan disguised as a gift to his own daughter, and the systematic ruin of his business partner. Each piece on its own was damaging. Together, they formed a portrait of a man who was not a pillar of the community but a ruthless, narcissistic fraud. My plan for revenge, which had started as a vague notion of exposure, now crystallized into a precise, multi-pronged strategy. It would be a symphony of consequences, with each movement timed perfectly to create maximum impact. I wasn't going to just expose him. I was going to dismantle his legacy, brick by brick, in the same way he had dismantled Marcus Thorne's life. My objective was threefold. First, to trigger a legal and financial firestorm he couldn't control. Second, to reveal his true nature to the one person whose opinion he truly valued, Isabella. And third, to provide a measure of justice for the man he had wronged, Marcus Thorne. The first step was the tax fraud. I compiled all my evidence, the falsified assessment records, the rental listings, tenant testimonials, into a comprehensive anonymous tip package. I sent one copy to the city's tax assessment office and another, more detailed copy to a well-known investigative journalist at the city's largest newspaper, a reporter famous for his exposés on corporate and real estate corruption. An anonymous tip about a prominent citizen would get their attention, and the evidence I provided was more than enough to launch a full-blown investigation. This would bring official scrutiny, legal fees, and most importantly, public humiliation. The second step was Isabella. Simply telling her what I'd found would be ineffective. She was conditioned to see our father as a benevolent protector. She would likely see my accusations as jealousy. I had to show her, not tell her. I created a simplified, easy-to-understand dossier. It contained the property records for her gallery, a flowchart clearly showing the trail of ownership of the lending firm back to our father, and a copy of the mortgage agreement she had signed. I highlighted the key clauses, the interest rate, and the repayment terms. I also included a gentle, anonymously written cover letter. It didn't accuse our father directly. Instead, it was framed as a warning from a concerned friend in the financial industry, urging her to have an independent lawyer review her loan documents, as they contained several predatory and unusual clauses that put her and her gallery at extreme risk. This approach wouldn't trigger her defenses. It would plant a seed of doubt and empower her to discover the truth for herself. The final and most important step was Marcus Thorne. Justice for him was paramount. I thought long and hard about the best way to approach this. Simply sending him the evidence of my father's other crimes might not be enough. He was bound by a 20-year-old NDA. I decided to offer him something more valuable than revenge, leverage. I put together a package for him, but this one was different. It contained a copy of the original settlement and NDA he had signed. But it also contained all the evidence of my father's tax fraud. My enclosed letter explained my relationship to Julian and the source of my information. I made him an offer. I would anonymously leak the tax fraud story to the press. When my father was drowning in legal trouble and his public reputation was in tatters, he would be at his most vulnerable. That, I explained, would be the moment for Marcus to approach him. With his reputation already destroyed by one scandal, the threat of another, the story of his first great betrayal would be unbearable. The NDA would be meaningless against the threat of total social and financial ruin. Marcus could renegotiate his original settlement from a position of immense strength. He could demand a public apology, financial restitution for his lost decades, or whatever else he felt would constitute justice. I wasn't telling him what to do. I was giving him back the power my father had stolen from him. With all three packages prepared, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of consequences. On a quiet Tuesday evening, I drove to 3 different post offices across the city. I mailed the package to the journalist and the tax office. I used a courier service to deliver the dossier to Isabella's gallery, and I sent the final, most important package to a small hardware store in a quiet town hundreds of miles away. Then I went home, deleted all the research files from my computer, and waited for the seeds I had planted to grow. The first tremors began about 10 days after I mailed the packages. It started with a phone call from Isabella. Her voice was strained, a stark contrast to her usual breezy tone. "Luca, do you have a minute? I need to ask you something about finance stuff." It was the first time in our adult lives she had ever asked for my professional opinion. I played dumb, feigning surprise. "Of course, what's up?" She hesitated, then explained that she had received a strange, anonymous letter urging her to look into the loan for her gallery. She'd taken the advice and showed the documents to a friend's husband, a lawyer. He said the loan terms are predatory, she stammered, her voice cracking. He said the lender is essentially my father, hidden behind other companies. He said I don't own the gallery, Luca. I'm just renting it from Dad, and I could be evicted at any time if I miss a single payment. Is that true? I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth with her. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I simply and calmly walked her through the documents she had in front of her, explaining the corporate structure and the legal implications in the same dispassionate tone I used with my clients. I confirmed that yes, her father was her lender. Yes, the loan was structured to give him total control. And yes, the gift he had given her in front of 100 people was not a gift of freedom, but a golden cage. There was a long, painful silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her quiet, ragged breathing. The image of our father as her tireless champion was shattering in real time. "But why would he do that?" she whispered, the question full of a child's disbelief. "To control you, Izzy," I said softly, using her childhood nickname. "The same reason he does everything, for control." The call ended soon after, not with a resolution but with her choked, whispered, "I have to go." The seed was not just planted, it had taken root. A week later, the main event began. The investigative reporter's story broke on the front page of the city's biggest newspaper. The headline was devastating: "Pillar of Philanthropy, Dr. Julian, my last name, in center of major tax fraud probe." The article was brutal and meticulous. It laid out the evidence of the falsified property assessments, complete with quotes from unnamed tenants and a statement from the city tax office confirming an active investigation. The story painted a picture of a respected public figure who had spent years systematically defrauding the city and its taxpayers out of millions of dollars. My father's name, once synonymous with surgical precision and civic grace, was now linked to words like fraud, deceit, and investigation. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. His phone must have been ringing off the hook. The boards of the charities he sat on would be convening emergency meetings. The country club where he had celebrated his legacy would be filled with whispers. His perfectly curated world of prestige was on fire. I waited for his call. It came that evening. His voice was a low growl, a wounded animal lashing out. "Did you do this?" he snarled, dispensing with any preamble. "This has your fingerprints all over it, this sterile, analytical takedown." I remained calm. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Dad," I said, my voice even. "But it sounds like you're in some trouble. Do you need the number of a good lawyer?" The insult landed like a physical blow. He erupted in a torrent of rage, accusing me of being a jealous, ungrateful son, of trying to destroy the family. I listened without interruption, letting him expend his fury. When he finally paused for breath, I said, "You know, for a man who gave me a framed photo to remind me what's important, you seem to have a poor memory. You taught me that actions have consequences. This is just a consequence." And then I hung up. The final act of the unveiling came a few days later. I received a short encrypted email. The sender was untraceable, but I knew who it was from. It contained only 5 words: "Justice is in motion, thank you." Marcus Thorne had received his package. He had seen my father's vulnerability and was making his move. I didn't know what his demands were, and I didn't need to. I had given him back his agency. The rest was his story to write. The climax occurred not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but at my Aunt Eleanor's house. She had called an emergency family meeting. When I arrived, my father and Isabella were already there. They were sitting on opposite ends of the sofa, a chasm of silence between them. My father looked 10 years older. The confident, regal man from the party was gone, replaced by a gray, haggard figure with desperation in his eyes. Isabella's face was pale and tear-streaked, her expression a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "Julian," Aunt Eleanor began, her voice firm. "Isabella has told me about the gallery. Luca has told me nothing, but I suspect he knows more than he's letting on, and I just received a call from Marcus Thorne's wife. I want to know what is going on." My father looked from me to Isabella, seeing the two fronts of his war converging in one room. He tried to bluster, to deny, to deflect. He accused me of poisoning Isabella's mind, of dredging up old history, but the facade was crumbling. Isabella finally broke her silence. "You lied to me," she said, her voice low but clear. "My whole life you made me feel like I was special, but it was all a lie. You didn't support my dream, you bought it, you own me, just like you own Marcus, just like you tried to own Luca by humiliating him." My father stood up, his face contorted. "I did it for you, to protect you." "No," she cried, standing to face him. "You did it for you. So you could be the great benefactor, the man who pulls all the strings. It was never about me, it was always about you." It was then that my father finally turned his full, desperate attention to me. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" he hissed. "To turn my own daughter against me, to ruin everything I've built." I looked him straight in the eye. "You built nothing," I said, my voice devoid of heat. "You stole the foundation from Marcus Thorne and you built a house of cards on it. The wind is blowing and it's all falling down. These are not my actions, they are the echoes of yours." The room fell silent. There was nothing left to say. The truth in all its ugly, unvarnished glory had been unveiled. His kingdom was gone, his queen had abdicated, and his ghost had finally come to collect. In the weeks and months that followed the confrontation at Aunt Eleanor's, the empire my father had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust. The city's tax fraud case against him moved forward with alarming speed. Faced with irrefutable evidence, his high-priced lawyers could do little more than negotiate a settlement. The final bill was staggering: years of back taxes, Chinese letter, hefty penalties, and interest charges that ran into the millions. To pay it, he was forced to begin liquidating his real estate portfolio. The very assets he had acquired through deceit were now being sold off to pay for that deceit. The newspaper reporter I had contacted followed the story relentlessly, publishing follow-up articles about the forced sales and the downfall of the once celebrated surgeon. My father's name became a local cautionary tale, a synonym for hubris. He retreated from public life entirely, resigning from his charity boards and canceling his country club membership. The king was in exile, trapped in his large, empty house with nothing but his tarnished legacy. The threat from Marcus Thorne proved to be the final, most devastating blow. With my father already weakened and disgraced, Marcus's lawyer approached him with the evidence of the original betrayal and a simple choice: either face another public lawsuit that would expose the fraudulent origins of his entire career, or make things right. My father, with no fight left in him, chose the latter. While the terms of their new settlement remained private, Aunt Eleanor later told me that Marcus had received a sum large enough to guarantee a comfortable life for him and his family, along with a lengthy, handwritten letter of apology from my father. It wasn't a perfect restoration of the life he had lost, but it was a form of justice, a rebalancing of the scales 2 decades too late. I never spoke to Marcus, but I felt a sense of profound satisfaction knowing that his name had been cleared, even if only between the two men who mattered. The most complex and painful fallout was with Isabella. The revelation of our father's manipulation had shattered her worldview. For a time she was adrift, grappling with the fact that the unconditional love and support she believed she had was, in fact, a carefully constructed system of control. She was angry with our father, but she was also angry with me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked me one day over a tense coffee. "I could have helped you, we could have faced him together." I explained that she wouldn't have believed me, that she needed to see the truth for herself to accept it. It was a difficult conversation, but it was an honest one, perhaps the first truly honest conversation of our adult lives. The golden cage my father had built for her was gone, but so was the safety net. She was truly on her own for the first time, and it was terrifying for her. She had to learn how to run her gallery as a real business, how to manage a budget, and how to stand on her own 2 feet. It was a struggle, and our relationship remained strained for a long time. The old dynamic of the golden child and the ghost was hard to erase. As for me, life returned to a new kind of normal. The anger that had fueled me for months slowly dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I hadn't just gotten revenge, I had performed a necessary, albeit painful, surgery on my own life. I had cut out the cancer of my father's influence and the false hope of one day earning his approval. I had freed him. A self, my work as an analyst, once a refuge, became a source of genuine satisfaction again. I found I was better at it, more decisive, more confident. I had navigated the most complex emotional merger and acquisition of my life and had come out the other side intact. My relationship with Aunt Alina deepened. She became the true matriarch of our fractured family, a source of quiet wisdom and unwavering support. We never spoke directly about the details of my plan, but she knew. A knowing look or a gentle squeeze of my hand was all that needed to be said between us. Several months ago, Isabella called me. She had successfully renegotiated the terms of her father's predatory loan into a standard commercial mortgage with a real bank. She was making it work on her own terms. Her gallery was hosting a show for a new local artist, and she asked if I wanted to come. I went. It was a small, intimate affair, nothing like our father's grand parties. As I walked through the gallery, looking at the art, I saw Isabella across the room. She was talking to an artist, her expression animated and passionate. She looked happy, genuinely happy. She caught my eye and gave me a small, real smile. It wasn't the dazzling smile of the golden child. It was the quiet, confident smile of a woman who was finally the curator of her own life. In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Our family would never be whole, but the broken pieces were slowly, carefully being put back together into something new, something more honest. My father had given my sister a car and me a photograph. In the end, I had helped give her freedom, and I had given myself the same. And that was a gift worth more than anything money could buy.